Hello, and welcome to Humanities Headlines. I'm Georges Van Den Abbeele, Dean of the School of Humanities at the University of California, Irvine, and I'm here today with Professor Jonathan Alexander to talk about literacy in young adult fiction. So, Jonathan, I'd like to ask you, you're a scholar of literacy. What interests you in young adult fiction, and why should we pay attention to it?
That's a great question. Several years ago, I myself began thinking about young adult fiction as a potentially really important domain of study, not just for its literary value and for the kinds of ways in which young adult fiction has developed and matured over the last several decades, even the last century.
Not so young anymore.
Not so young anymore, exactly. Young adult fiction has all grown up, and we can certainly talk about that. But I began paying attention to it because as a literacy scholar, I was intrigued by the potential impact that young adult fiction might be having on young readers and young writers' understanding of what it means to be literate right now. I was actually in London and just happened to be there early mid-2000s for the release of the 5th Harry Potter book. I wasn't really reading those books at the time, but I had several friends who were reading them. My husband was there with me. He wanted to pick up the book, so we hung out in Piccadilly Circus, and then we went to the large Waterstones bookstore so that we could stand in line, queue up for the release of this book. Got there around 11 p.m. The line was already 12 blocks long. And this is 11 p.m. at night. Wow. Kids everywhere in costume, international media.
It's all past
their bedtime. It really was a circus. And then we finally got this book, and I realized this is a 600-page book that young people, many adults, are going to be staying up all night to read. And I thought, I have to be paying attention to this as a sort of phenomenon, a literacy phenomenon. Something important is happening to reading cultures, to people's engagement with books, to a kind of resuscitation of ludic reading, reading as not just as pure pleasure, and large, long books in complex series as being really engaging to people. So I began tracking what this might mean, what this trend in young adult fiction and the development of that market might actually mean for young people's literacies.
So tell us, first of all, how would you give a working definition of young adult fiction?
This is the billion-dollar question, and I say that because in any given year, in publishing alone, young adult fiction comprises about nearly a $3 billion market for the various publishing industries, and that's just publishers alone. That doesn't include all the multimedia that comes out of young adult fiction. So how do we categorize YA? What does that mean? The YALSA, the Young Adult Library Services Association, which is a division of the American Library Association, classifies young adult fiction as books primarily for teenagers, for 13 to 18-year-olds. And I have followed that particular definition, focusing primarily on books that are headed by publishers towards young adults, really teens, people right on the cusp of adulthood. Now that gets complicated because our understanding of what it means to be adolescent and adult is shifting. And we know that in any given year, 50 to 55% of young adult books are purchased not just by kids, but by adults, many of them well into their 40s. So it's an interesting problem. When we say young adult, what do we mean? There's definitely a market category. Publishers like the Scholastic Corporation, for instance, are actively publishing books for young readers, teen readers, 13 to 18 years of age. And yet there's been some slippage, and many people in their 20s, 30s, and even in their 40s are reading this kind of material. And publishers are aware of that, and so they will often publish books that are going to appeal not just to adolescent and teen readers, but also have some ongoing interest to slightly older readers as well. So one of the things I'm particularly interested in doing is raising the level of conversation around young adult fiction to kind of alert people, curious readers and others, that this is a body of work that on one hand is certainly mass market. There is an effort to sell books here, and many corporations are they see this, publishers see this domain as an opportunity to make money. With 30,000 young adult titles published annually, it's a huge, huge market. And so there's definitely, for lack of a better word, a lot of schlock that gets produced. Sure. At the same time, there are many important literary writers and others who are interested in raising the bar on the quality of young adult fiction. Sherman Alexie, for instance, has written a fabulous book called The Absolute True Diary of a Part-Time Indian, which is a remarkably insightful tale about assimilationist politics and growing up as a Native American in this country. And it is a often emotionally difficult, intellectually challenging, and then ultimately, I think, a very kind of boundary-pushing text that asks a lot of hard questions about race relations in our country. It's a significant achievement, and so my goal in writing reviews about young adult fiction and then also being a scholar of literacy in relation to young adult fiction is really to alert people that there is a lot of important material being produced that can incite conversations, that we can use to advance critical thinking, that we can also think about as a way to foster greater engagement with some of the more pressing sociopolitical issues of our day.
Excellent. That leads me to ask you a different kind of question that I have. Recently, there's been some stories in the press, I think New York Times recently, bemoaning the ability of young people to read long works or work through long works or write in long, because we're in the culture of Twitter and Facebook and sound bites and shortness of things. But from what I'm listening to you talk about, many of these are very long books.
Many of them
and
are.
So,
many of them are long series.
And series of them, yes, exactly. So how do you see that playing out? Because it's sort of like you've got this sort of perception that people don't read, or they operate in 140 character bursts and not in longer ones, when this seems to be the trend. It may in fact be the opposite.
I think so. I think it's a pretty complicated story. I mean, literacy right now, being literate means so many different things. In fact, people in the new literacy studies use the term multi-literate to describe, multi-literacy to describe the complexity of literacy right now. And multi-literacy would include both kind of a multicultural competence, the ability to navigate amongst different kinds of cultural issues and venues, but then also technological literacies and multiple technological literacies. How do you not only Google search, how do you create a rhetorically effective tweet, but then also how do you sift through long and complicated articles or books? And so I think that's the key, is to recognize that people right now are increasingly multi-literate. On one hand, they are able to produce 140 character tweets, and yet many of them are also engaging in profoundly difficult, long, complicated acts of literacy. They're not only reading these books and these series, but many of the kind of do-it-yourself media that I've collected for analysis involves a great deal of collaborative work that people are doing over many months in response to kind of thinking through some of their favorite texts. So I'll give you a quick example. One of the books that I've been studying is a book called Every Day by David Levithan, who's a very important young adult fiction writer and editor at Scholastic. And I've been following his career and tracking his work for some time. And I'm amazed not just at his own literary production, which is often quite sophisticated and challenging, but then also at the kinds of work that young people do in response to it. The essays that they write, the video trailers that they make about his books. Every Day, for instance, a group of young people made Every Day into a 45-minute film and posted it on YouTube. Now, this is a film with multiple characters, a dense and complicated script, and it's quite extraordinary. And so these are young people, these are teenagers who are making their own film, for which they had to create a script, for which they had to storyboard, and then film, and then edit. That's a fairly remarkable accomplishment that requires a great deal of attention and a fine focus on detail. So I actually am not that concerned about kind of the lack of attention or the lack of young people's ability to stay on task for different projects. In fact, I'm seeing quite the opposite in many cases. Now again, there are many different people out there.
I mean, one could always say that the traditional novel in the 18th and 19th centuries was accompanied by a great amount of pride and attention to the so-called short forms, aphorisms and things like that. So, you know, it seems to me, and I tend to agree, and I'm, you know, very intrigued by your depiction of it, that in fact, there's no reason why one couldn't have these multiple abilities.
Absolutely.
And in fact, that's exactly what we would want to see, is you can, you know, do an elegant, effective tweet and work through a 45-minute film or a 600-page novel.
That's right.
And you know, obviously they require different abilities, styles, and a certain kind of adaptability or resiliency. And maybe that's one of the things that makes this an exciting genre of literature.
To promote that kind of multiliteracy right now seems to me one of our most pressing educational tasks. I think we want young people, we want a citizenry that can certainly be pithy, right?
Yes.
That can be clever and attention-getting. Different views can be reduced to tweets to catch attention. But I'm really interested in the kinds of tweets that then lead to other kinds of media.
Right.
So the tweet about the book, the film, the tweet about the argument or the discussion that then leads to other ways of grappling with books, with long-form media, with long-form journalism, with intelligent, complicated films. And so I think we need to think more in terms of larger rhetorical ecologies.
Yeah.
Those tweets don't exist. Sometimes they do. They're just one-offs. They just exist in their own.
But usually not.
But usually not. They're
Part
pointing
of
to other conversations. They're pointing to other debates. And to the extent that 140 characters can alert me to an important conversation, and I get to follow up on a long-form journalism article about that conversation, about that debate or topic or whatnot, to me that's an effective and an important use of short media.
You can, if you're clever, you can squeeze a lot into those 140 characters, and you know, direct one to other sources and the rest and other sites and so on.
Absolutely.
What young adult books or book would you suggest for someone who wants to explore this genre but is not familiar with it? Or what would be a good place to start?
Well, I mentioned the Sherman Alexie text, and I think it's a wonderful one. But the one that have been really impressed with, came out in 2009, is called Little Brother by Cory Doctorow. And Doctorow is a very, very important media activist, internet activist, somebody who's been around for quite some time, one of the early bloggers, who really is trying to raise our attention around media privacy, around the politics of internet censorship and information dissemination.
Yes.
And Little Brother is a very important, gripping, I think easily accessible tale that lays out some of the more pressing issues facing internet users today. What does it mean to go online? Who is tracking what I do when I go online? Who has access to information I might post up to a social networking site, for instance? And so raising awareness around digital literacy is one of Doctorow's primary tasks. And he's created a marvelous book, kind of a very gripping political tale about young people trying themselves to figure out what does it mean to be info and digitally literate right now. And I think it's a book that more and more people should be taking a look at for its pedagogical dimensions in laying out some of these issues.
Sounds like a kind of pendant to Big Brother.
Exactly.
You know,
that is precisely what it is.
Exactly
So Doctorow intends Little Brother to be the contemporary corollary to Orwell's concerns about hyper-surveillance and political control.
As I think we probably see in contemporary society, where surveillance takes that kind of form, a kind of undisclosed, apparently minor, but actually accumulatively significant.
That's right.
Right. Well, thank you very much. And so I want to thank again Professor Jonathan Alexander for letting us into the world of young adult fiction. This is Georges Van Den Abbeele, UC Irvine, and thank you again for this episode of Humanities Headlines, and look forward to your tuning in next time. Thank you.